Story time about how I got caught skipping school almost every day of my senior year. So our school had just started this new thing where you fill out all your contact information online. And my dad was like, okay, yeah, just fill yours out. And it pretty much was who can pick you up, who can make early dismissals for you, who they can call if you're in trouble. Well, I decided to be a sneaky little bastard and put my boyfriend in for every single one of those contacts. I would start school around 7:30 a.m. and I would go to the nurse's office at like 9 a.m. and she would call and my boyfriend would act like my dad and be like, okay, yeah, just let her drive home. Well, my guidance counselor noticed after about 3 months of me never being at school. So she called the number hoping to speak to my dad. But instead she got my boyfriend. And he just thought it was a random person, so he didn't act like my dad. Because neither of us knew. Like for part 2. Okay, part 2. Okay, so pretty much what happened after that is she called and like she found out that it wasn't my dad. And then she went digging and like she like called my sister to the office and she was like, what's your dad's phone number? And my sister was like, why? Like, don't you guys have it already? And I also put the same numbers for my sisters so that way in case this day came, then, you know, it wouldn't look suspicious. Well, I don't know what she threatened my sister with, but she scared the hell out of her, so she gave her my dad's number. And so my sister told me whenever she got home, so I went to school the next day. And it was like a surprise party whenever I walked in the office. The dean was there, the principal was there, and my guidance counselor. So I got in trouble and then they were like, oh, we're calling your dad. So what did I do? I left before they called him. Extremely toxic best friend part 2. So pretty much her excuse for that was, oh, well, he said that he was gonna leak my nudes if I didn't send him them again. Which was a lie because literally half the school already had her nudes. So then I started talking to this other boy. And he lived like right down the street from her. So she was like, if you want to go to his house, you can. And I was like, are you sure? And she said, yeah, just go tell my mom. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went and told her mom where I was going and went over his house. So I walked back to her house and she literally locked me out. Like her mom had to come open the door for me to let me in. And she was like, oh, it's a good thing you came back when you did. Because I was going to drive you home now and tell your dad everything that you did. And she goes, I don't think you guys should be together because you're unexperienced. And she would always tell me how he flirts with her all the time. So after our friendship ended, she goes, I just felt like it was always a competition between me and you. Story time about my toxic ex-boyfriend that I met in therapy. Little background information. I was a part of this therapy group where you would go every week and talk about your feelings. Well, I saw this really cute kid, so I wrote down my Snapchat and gave it to him. He added me back and then we started dating like a week later. And for the first 2 or 3 months, everything was going smooth. And then he became really toxic and controlling. Like he would always go through my phone. And any guy that I had a streak with, he would accuse me of cheating on him with them. And it got to the point where he was literally so clingy. Like every second of every day he wanted to FaceTime, he had to be talking to me. I had to have my location on. And I would explain to him that I needed my space, but he literally just did not get the hint. So by this point we were literally on and off all the time. And anytime that I broke up with him, I would block him because I didn't want to think about him. But he started calling my parents and complaining about me. So they blocked him. And then he tried being friends with my brother to get to me. Welcome back to another toxic best friend story time. A little background information. I was friends with this girl since elementary school. And we had a really good friendship until we got into high school. Like we always got along, never fought over boys. Well, during our freshman year, this new boy started at our school. Well, I started talking to him. And after a month of still talking to him, my best friend goes, I don't think you should talk to him. He talks to a lot of girls. And because she was my best friend, I didn't think she would lie about that. I believed her and I stopped talking to him. Well, that weekend, I went over her house. And when I walked in her room, she goes, oh, say hi. And who else is on the phone but the boy she told me not to talk to? So after they got off the phone, I was like, let me guess, you told me to stop talking to him because you liked him. And she goes, yeah, I just knew that if I told you I liked him, you wouldn't stop talking to him. So that night, we went to a party and he was there. and things started to go south, like for part 2. Part 2 to my most recent toxic best friend story time. Little background information. I told him the reason why I didn't want to talk anymore was because I just didn't want a relationship. So we get to the party, and him and his friends were there, so she went over to them. And I went and talked to other people because I just didn't want it to be awkward. Well, an hour later, we all met up again, and I started having a conversation with him. Well, I guess my best friend didn't like that, so she started embarrassing me in front of everybody. So she starts talking about how my clothes don't fit me right and I look like a blah, and how my boobs are so much smaller than hers, and how I don't have an ass. Literally in front of everybody, just embarrassing herself. And me. So after that, she went to the bathroom to throw up because she had way too much to drink. And him and I started talking. And he was like, why wouldn't you just tell me that you didn't like me? And I was like, what do you mean? I just didn't want a relationship. He goes, oh, well, she just told me that you like somebody else. So that was the last straw, and I just left her at the party. Toxic ex-boyfriend story time. So I was a junior in high school, and I had just gotten out of a 4-year relationship with this one guy. Well, I started to see him date around, so I thought I should do the same. I started dating this new guy who was known as the biggest player. Since I just got out of a long-term relationship, we decided to take things slow. We both went to different schools. So we both had separate proms. And of course we both asked each other. So his prom came around first, so we got a shore house with his friends. And before we left, he bought me 2 dozen roses. This man has never bought me anything. And my mom was like, that's strange. I know exactly what he's trying to do with you. I now see that may have been a warning. But did I listen? No. After prom, we went to the shore house and he tried to make it happen. I said no. The next morning, we both left. It was a Saturday because I had dance and he had baseball practice. He went back to the shore house that night and I didn't hear from him all weekend, like for part 2. Part 2 because y'all are impatient and gotta go to sleep. So I didn't hear from him all weekend, but I left my blanket there and I texted him so he wouldn't forget it. And he was like, okay, yeah, I'll drop it off and we can hang out because I haven't seen you. And then he says that he apparently spilt beer all over it, so he had to wash it. And everything was good until my prom. So we went and he was acting extremely weird and super distant. So that's when I kind of knew that something was up. I didn't have a shore house for my prom, but he was like best friends with all the senior girls who went to my school. So of course they invited him and we went. And then I saw all over social media that there were pictures of him with his ex holding hands and hanging all over each other at the beach. So I had work that night and I just so happened to work with his best friend. And I told him about how he was being super distant and how I saw all those pictures all over social media. And he was like, yeah, we never spilt beer on your blanket that night. He was actually with his ex and they did it on the blanket. Moral of the story, don't date the guy who's named a player because it's probably for a reason. Story time about how I was the side chick. So it was my freshman year and I had just moved to a new school. And I lived next to this senior boy. You know, the one that thinks you're good enough to do stuff with but not good enough to date? Yeah, that one. Well, we both were on the same bus and I thought he was really cute, so I asked him for his Snapchat. And I got it. So we started talking a lot and we would always talk about me sneaking over his house because my parents were super strict. So homecoming night, I saw him grinding with this girl, but I didn't exactly think anything of it because literally everybody was just being passed around. Well, I went home after and at like 2 in the morning, I got a text from him saying to come over. So I went over there, we did the dirty, and then I started to go over there almost every other night. At 2 in the morning. And there was this one girl that I got really close with. And I told her all about the situation, but I didn't tell her till like 3 months after it was happening because he told me not to tell anybody, of course. And she goes, you know he has a girlfriend, right? So I felt really bad and confronted him, like for part 2. Part 2 of me being the side chick. So that night he had asked me to come over again. And I went over there, but it's not what you think it was for. I got over there and I was like, when were you gonna tell me you had a girlfriend? Literally, this comment made me want to throw up. He goes, what do you mean? I thought you knew. So I was like, no, I actually didn't. And he goes, so does that mean you don't want to come over anymore? He goes, I really liked you, and I was gonna break up with my girlfriend for you. Which I know this is so bad, but that made me happy because I had the biggest crush on him. But then I just left. And the girl that he was dating was a senior. And I asked my friend for her Snapchat so I could Snapchat her. So I did, and I told her everything that was going on. And somehow it got flipped around on me. Her saying that I was obsessed with her boyfriend. And then she got the nudes that I sent her boyfriend and sent them around the whole school. My new school. Moral of the story, if he says he's single, make sure he's actually single. Story time about how my boyfriend was cheating on me for 3 months straight at his new job. So a little background information. At this point in our relationship, I did not have much trust for him because of his cheating in the past. Well, when he got this new job, I decided that I was going to start trusting him. I don't know why, stupidest thing I've ever done. So a month goes past, he's been working at this place for a while, and he comes home one night with a girl's phone number in his pocket. And I'm like, whose phone number is this? He's like, oh, one of the girls that I work with wants me to talk about her problems with her. So I threw the number away and I started to get really paranoid. But every time that I would get paranoid, he would be like, babe, I'm not doing anything, like I really love you, I'm trying to change. And he said that literally every night. And his brother worked with him. Well, the one day he really pissed his brother off, so his brother was like, I'm telling her everything that you've been doing. So he calls me and says he's been fucking 2 other girls at work. Like for part 2. Part 2 about my cheating boyfriend. So after I got off the phone, he's trying to convince me that it's not true, saying that the only reason why his brother would say that is because he was mad at him, which I kind of believe because his brother did lie 24/7, or try to play jokes on everybody. So I ended up believing my boyfriend, and to put the icing on top of the cake, I believed him even more because his brother texted me saying that it wasn't true. So a few months go by and he quits that job. And at this time, him and I were really on and off because I didn't like the way that I was being treated. While being broken up for a few days, I got the app Tinder. And I guess the day after I got my Tinder, his friend showed him the app and he got it too. And the first person that he saw whenever he logged on to the app was me. So he texted me saying, you're a whore and I'm so happy I cheated on you with that girl. And that really broke my heart, because every night he would come home telling me he loved me after he did whatever with those girls. And anytime I got paranoid about him cheating, he would comfort me. Story time about how I hooked up with a guy in my science teacher's closet. So my whole grade went on this field trip, and everybody was dressing super nice, wearing a dress. And I wore a dress that day, even though I was more of a leggings and t-shirt kind of gal. And I wore spandex under because I hated not being able to move around. Well, after our field trip, everybody's jumping around on the bus, I don't care what I'm doing because I have shorts on under my dress. And after school that day, I get a text from one of the popular boys. And he goes, I'm really physically attracted to you. And I was like, oh, same, period. And he was like, wanna hook up tomorrow? And I was like, during school? He goes, yeah, I have a place where we can hook up. And I wasn't really experienced with boys. So I was like, fuck it, if I'm gonna experiment, it's gonna be with you. Cause he was really hot. So the next day I meet him during lunch, and he takes me to this one spot, but we couldn't hook up there because it wasn't blocked off like it usually is. So we go to my science teacher's room, and right after we hook up, our science teacher walks in. Story time about how my boyfriend and I got robbed for over $3,000. And I know someone's about to be like, $3,000 isn't even a lot of money. We were both teenagers and both saved up a year's worth of paychecks for this, so it was a lot of money to us. So my boyfriend and I were looking for a car that we could use for about a year or so, and we found this one guy on Facebook. And the car looked too good for the price that he was selling it at, but I got in contact, asked him if he would meet me somewhere, and then he started being super sketchy. He was like, well, I still have to do some work on it, so can you guys come to my house? So we drove an hour away to his place, and we pull up to this apartment, and we drive around a few times, and the car is nowhere to be seen. So he meets us outside, we go in his house. Super nice, offered us drinks and everything. And then he goes, okay, can I have the money now? And we're like, well, we want to see the car. And he goes, you guys can see the car after you give me the money. I just don't want to get robbed. So we give him the money and he goes to the back to count it. For part 2. Part 2 on my boyfriend and I getting robbed. So like I said, we gave him the money and he said he had to go to the back to count it. So I look over at my boyfriend and he's shaking his head because we already knew what was going on at this point. And as soon as I hear footsteps, I turn my head, and this guy is standing there with a gun pointed in between my boyfriend and I's heads and a baseball bat in the other hand. And then he goes, okay, you guys can get the fuck out of my house now. Before we leave his house, my boyfriend's like, bro, can I at least get the money back? And of course the guy says no. So then I called the cops, and my boyfriend didn't want me to call the cops because he was like, I want to handle it my own way. But I didn't care. That was money that we worked hard for. So I got on the phone with the police. We went down to the police station. We made our statements and everything like that. And then we go back, I think a week later. And they show us a picture and they're like, oh, is this him? Well, apparently this guy had a lot of gun charges and everything like that. So he went to jail and had to do community service for part 3.
Part 3 on my boyfriend and I getting robbed. So like I said, they said that he had a lot of gun charges, and so he went to jail. And I think he was only in there for 6 months because apparently he was only a teenager. So after he got out, it was like time for him to start paying us back. And I was so happy that I didn't let my boyfriend handle it his own way. I feel like this was the best revenge or whatever. He had to spend that whole summer doing community service to pay us back. And it's not like a fine where you can just pay that money back. Like, you actually have to do community service for that money. Or I'm pretty sure that's what the cops told us. But the funniest thing is we actually saw him walking in the mall with his dad whenever we got one of the paychecks because we went shopping with it. And we were walking right behind him. And my boyfriend wanted to say something. And, I was like, no, we already got the money back. Let's not
do that. Story time about me being the toxic best friend. So my best friend was dating this guy for about 1.5 years. And for the past 6 or 7 months, she would say that she wasn't happy, she didn't like how she was being treated, but she couldn't leave him. Well, at this time, they lived together, and that night we were supposed to decorate her apartment for her birthday party. So since she was at work, she just told me to go over her house and start decorating until she got home. Well, who happened to be there but her shitty-ass boyfriend? And him and I didn't really get along. Well, him and I were setting up and he was being super nice. Like, overly nice. Which really weirded me out. Well, later on after the party, my best friend was hammered, so we both put her to bed and started cleaning up. And we were both drunk and started flirting with each other. And then one thing led to another. And I did it with my best friend's boyfriend in her house. So for the next 3 months, we have like this secret relationship, like for part 2. Part 2 to me being the toxic best friend. So like I said, him and I had this secret relationship for like 3 months straight. And I would always just go over to my best friend's house while she was working and see him then. Well, the one day she came home early from work. And she walked in on her boyfriend and I in her bed. So after that, she finally got the courage to leave her boyfriend. And now she's happily married. So I kind of saw it as I pushed her to do something that she knew she would never do. And after having my number blocked for like 3 years, she texts me and she says, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. You showed me that I could leave my boyfriend and that you were actually just a terrible friend. But now I'm happy for her. She's living the best life that she can live, and I'm still with her ex-boyfriend." Story time about my toxic ex-friend group. So my freshman year, I had moved to a new high school. So right away, I started being friends with this group of girls, and they were super nice. And I was also friends with this group of guys. Well, since I was friends with both groups, we all started hanging out all the time, but only whenever I was there. The boys just didn't want to hang out with the other girls. And after a few months, the girls started acting really strange. So anytime that I would hang out with the boys and not invite them, they would ignore me for a whole week. Meaning they wouldn't talk to me in school, they wouldn't answer my messages, or anything like that. Not a single one of them. And also, anytime that we hung out, they would be like, "Oh, invite the boys." And it was like they never wanted to hang out with me. So the one night, one of the boys was throwing a party. And I was going, and the girls asked if they could come, but they had drama with a lot of people, so the boys didn't want them coming, but I invited them anyways. Like for part 2. Part 2 to the toxic ex-friend group story time. So, I invited them to the party, they showed up, and they were being really rude and standoffish the whole entire night. And these girls literally hated it whenever I would hang out with the boys or talk to the boys. Come to find out that every single one of the girls had a crush on every single one of the guys that were in my friend group. Also, I'm a very friendly person and will talk to anybody, and they got pissed off whenever I was talking to anybody who wasn't them. So a little bit into the party, I start getting a lot of dirty looks from a lot of different girls that I've never even talked to. And this girl walks up to me and she's like, "Why have you been Snapchatting my boyfriend?" And I'm like, "Girl, what are you talking about?" She goes, "A few of your friends told me that you like my boyfriend and that you've been Snapchatting him and trying to get with him." So then she calls the girls over from my friend group and goes, "Didn't she tell me this?" And they're like, "Yeah, she tries to get with everybody's boyfriend." So after that, I got kicked out of both friend groups because they spread a bunch of lies and rumors about me.
Story time about how my boyfriend cheated on me with a 17-year-old girl. So when summer started, I started working at this new job. And I had a really good connection with one of my coworkers. And he was 28 years old. So we started talking. But I would get mad at him a lot because he would ignore my messages asking to hang out. And on top of that, every time that we got done with work, we would all go sit and eat, and he would sit next to this one girl. And by the way, she was 17. And I could see them flirting all the time. Well, finally, once summer ended, she moved away. And then I felt like I had a real chance to start dating him. So we started hanging out a lot and hooking up a lot. After a few months, I started taking our relationship serious. Well, apparently not for him, because there was this girl on his phone that he had been texting a lot. So weirdly enough, after that, I get a DM from the girl that he would always flirt with at work. And she asked me if I was dating him. And I said, yeah, and then she goes, oh, well, he's been texting me a lot. So then I blocked her and went and hooked up with one of his friends that night, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend was cheating on me with a 17-year-old girl. So like I said, I hooked up with his friend that night, but I didn't tell him for a couple months because he would always say that we weren't dating, even though we were basically in a relationship. So we were doing really good until around Christmas time. So after he gave me my gifts, which was socks and a candle, he left for Massachusetts. I don't know if I said that right. And a month before this, I had unblocked the girl that he was flirting with. So weirdly enough, after he left, she DM'd me, basically asking if I was still dating him again. And I was like, yeah, why? And she goes, well, I need to tell you something. He actually took my virginity, and he's been sending me a lot of gifts, like a record player and albums, and we've been talking on the phone every night. So when I confronted him about it, he said he felt bad for her because he took her virginity. So after that, I confessed to hooking up with his best friend and called him a child predator. Crazy story time about how I found my aunt and my boyfriend hooking up at a family function. So every year my mom and stepdad would have a Christmas party and everyone from both sides of the family would come. And I also invited my boyfriend. And at this time my boyfriend and I were both juniors in high school. So everybody came to the party and everything was going good. Well, like an hour into the party, all the adults were super drunk. So before we all opened gifts, I decided to help my mom clean up dinner. So while I'm washing the dishes, I look over and my aunt and boyfriend are talking a lot. And she started to get really touchy with him, but I didn't think anything of it because she was super drunk. So after I'm done cleaning up, we all start opening gifts. And my boyfriend goes up to my room to go get his phone off the charger. And after he went upstairs, my aunt was like, oh, I need to go throw up. So about 10 minutes goes past and my boyfriend's still up in the room grabbing his phone, so I went to check on him. And I walk upstairs to see my aunt and my boyfriend laying on my bed making out. Like for part 2. Part 2 to how I caught my aunt and my boyfriend hooking up at a family function. So like I said, they are laying on my bed making out. Doors wide open, they don't even bother to shut the door. And both of their shirts are off. And I think I should just put in here, my aunt is like 28. She's on my stepdad's side. She's really young. So they look up and my aunt's just like drunk as fuck looking at me. And she's like, do you want to join? Like, bitch, what the fuck? So I'm just like shook and I start screaming. Everybody rushes up the stairs and my mom pushes me out of the way and sees my boyfriend and my aunt laying on my bed with their shirts off. So my mom starts screaming at everybody. So my mom calls the cops, says that an adult is touching an underage boy, and she calls his mom, tells her what happened. So my boyfriend and I broke up, so that spread around the whole school, and word got out that they actually started seeing each other.